What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Next Pats podcast. I'm Phil Perry. We have a great episode lined up for you this week. We're talking to my guy, my co-host on the breakdown. It's Ted Johnson, longtime Patriots linebacker, three-time Super Bowl champion. You know him from his work with us at NBC Sports Boston. You know him from his work at the Sports Hub. And the reason I brought him in, aside from the fact that I just missed the guy, we did not have a breakdown episode this week because the Patriots are coming off their bye. So no game, no plays to break down. That's okay. We brought him into Next Pats. And we're taking a big picture look at this 2021 team, and we're comparing it in detail to that 2001 team that this year's team has been so frequently compared to, especially over the course of the last couple months. And I get it. I do. When you look at this year's team, first-year quarterback, 2001, first-year quarterback, both pocket passers, not the greatest athletes of all time. Both teams, phenomenal defenses. Both teams, very good in the kicking game. Bill Belichick is the constant on the sidelines. I just feel like there's more to dig into, right? There's more to plumb when it comes to, yes, this team looks like 0-1 because of X, Y, and Z, or no. You can't talk about this year's team in the same breath as that 0-1 team because of ABC. So let's get into it. Let's dive into the details. Ted Johnson's with us. We're going to talk to him for 30 minutes or so, just going back and forth. A lot of good stuff for those of you that remember that 0-1 team. I know we have some listeners that are a little bit younger that don't remember that 0-1 team. So this will be extra special for you. If you've been following along with the Brady Man in the Arena episodes as well, this will be just another angle that goes along with that first episode that Brady put together, where a lot of it was about Brady stepping in and filling the shoes of Drew Bledsoe, but it was also, how was the team constructed? You know, Willie McGinnis has a great line in there. There was nothing wow about our offense that year. It was our defense that really was carrying us. And Brady acknowledged that too at points. So this year's team versus that team in 2001, the team that got it all going, the team that turned Boston really into a football town, in my opinion. We're taking a close look at them. And then this year as well, you're going to be, I think, surprised at just how many similarities there are. But Ted Johnson does put the stop sign down at points as well and says, okay, hold on. You want to say Mac Jones is better now than Tom Brady was in 2001? He gives you details on that and much more in our conversation. Let's get to it. All right, very happy to bring in a member of that 2001 Patriots Super Bowl team, Ted Johnson. Ted, thanks for being with us, man.
Of course, Phil. Anytime, buddy. Good to be with you.
You thought you were going to get away from me for a week. We had the breakdown this week because the Patriots are coming off their bye, so no game to break down. Yeah. But we had to bring you in. I missed you, number one. But number two, I feel like this is a good conversation for us to have this time of year. Again, no game to really dissect from the previous week. They do have a big game coming up against the Colts. But this is a conversation that has kind of loomed over this team for the last few weeks, it feels like, Ted, as the Patriots have been on this run, how similar they are to that 2001 team. And I think the easy go-to example is, young quarterback with a good defense on that 2001 team, young quarterback with a good defense on this 2021 team. Nice symmetry there. 20 years later, it's just we're watching it all happen again. It's deja vu all over again. How do you feel though when you hear this team in 2021 get compared to that team in 01 that you were a part of?
Yeah, you know what? I don't have that big of a problem with it, and a lot of guys from that 01 team might disagree with me. And a lot of people that are huge fans of that 01 team, Phil, would fight you on this. I don't have that much of a problem. And besides, it's more nuanced than what people think. And I think there's a lot of similarities. And it doesn't just start with a great defense, and a young quarterback. Like that's like you just said is mostly how the two teams are described. I would say you have to look at the kind of the psychology and where the teams were in total kind of, I would say, roster building. They're similar in how the rosters are being built in this regard, Phil. So you have a core group of guys on that 01 team. There was a lot of carryover from those mid-90s teams, and those mid-90s teams were excellent teams. We probably underachieved when Pete Carroll came here, but we got to a Super Bowl in 96 under Bill Parcells, and a lot of those guys who were on that 96 team were on that 01 team, all right? And so there's a lot of the same kind of issues that you have this year where there's a lot of good core players that were already here where you added free agents in the offseason that had made impact. And so the mixture really worked. And both teams got off to slow starts. They're trying to figure each other out. And I'll be honest, that 0-1 team, it took us a while to buy in to what Bill was selling. And eventually we all did. And you saw how we went on and won the whole thing. I feel like that is a big part of the comparison between the 0-1 team and this year's team is the buy-in factor took a while, but we've all seen it after the Dallas game and what they did to the Jets right after the Dallas game. And the buy-in has been at a high level, much like it was for us in 0-1 midway through the season. We figured it out. We believed in Bill. We knew what he was doing was the best thing for us. And so we completely bought in, and you're seeing pretty much the same thing with this team.
Yeah, I love talking about the team building part of it because that's really the core of what we're trying to get at in this podcast. We talk a lot about Mac Jones. We talk a lot about the young players on this team, but at its core, this podcast, Next Pats, is really about what's coming next. So it's how they're building towards the future. It's all about the draft. It's about free agency. And I do find that, like, before we even get into that season, the free agent classes, and much has been made about this year's free agent class. And obviously it has been massive to their success. Not only the new faces, Hunter Henry, Kendrick Bourne, Jalen Mills has been a big part of what they're doing defensively, but some familiar faces that they brought back in free agency, Ted Karras, Kyle Van Noy, they trade for Trent Brown. He's considered part of that offseason group as well. David Andrews comes back, right? Lawrence Guy gets re-signed. Devon Godshaw is a new name who's made some big impact plays and had some big impact games of late here. So we know how important this group has been. We didn't mention Jonnu Smith or Nelson Aguilar. Like, maybe those guys eventually, there's still plenty of football left this season. Maybe those guys end up making big contributions as well. I just want to rattle off some of the names to you here, Ted, because you were part of that core, right? You guys, a lot of those guys had gone to a Super Bowl, 5 years prior to that, to that 0-1 team. But listen to some of these names. I know you remember these guys, but I just want the people at home to remember just how massive the free agent class was in 2001 going into that season. Mike Vrabel, Antoine Smith, Anthony Pleasant, Roman Pfeiffer, David Patton, Larry Izzo, Brian Cox, Mike Compton, Terrell Buckley. All these guys were, if not day one starters, they were starters eventually, or they were massive impact players. Damon Heward, which I think a lot of people thought would be the backup quarterback to Drew that year, got brought in that year. The fullback, Mark Edwards, who had a role. Like, man, that's just, it's almost a dozen names there, Ted, that ended up being big time contributors. Do you remember them bringing in as many players as they did and thinking, wow, our team is totally reshaping here because of this free agent class?
Yeah. Well, yeah. To some degree. But I will say this. It wasn't like those guys came in and all of a sudden they took, they were the core group. I mean, they're still there. I mean, we had so many great players on that team already, but we needed an injection of new players and guys, quite honestly, Phil, that wanted to win. They came here, not only did they get paid, but they were wherever they were at their previous teams, they hadn't won, right? And we had some competitive, highly talented core group of guys that we embraced those guys. If they were going to help us win, that's all we cared about. And so they came in here from these other teams and they hadn't won before. And so they just wanted to win. And I think that's what you have. You don't have a lot of fat and happy guys on this team. And in that 0-1 team, you had hungry guys that just wanted to be led and wanted a good quality coaching. We hadn't had it in a while here in New England. No disrespect to Pete Carroll. It just probably wasn't the job for him. And so these other free agents, they weren't happy with the teams they were playing on. They come here and we all were kind of focused towards the same goal. And so we embraced those guys and they had immediate impacts and we all got along from day one. And I see that similarly here. These rookies are gelling well with these veterans, the free agents they brought in, with the core group of guys that are already here. They all want to win and they all are competitive guys. And so that's very much a core kind of similarity, if you will, between those two teams. And I think that's important. A lot of people don't look at the psychology and the team building aspect of it, but it's very, very important. If you ever hear me talk football, I'm really always talking about that. And I see similarities in this team as the 0-1 team.
Yeah. And you mentioned, the draft class too. one of the best draft classes in Patriots history. And you really just go with those top two guys with Matt Light and Richard Seymour, Richard Seymour being the high first round pick and being a critical part. But then go back to this year. I think this year, if Mac Jones and Christian Barmore continue to trend on the trajectory that they're on, we're going to be looking back at this draft class as one of the best that Bill has ever had. And that doesn't even factor in, Ramondre Stevenson in the 4th round. We still haven't seen Ronnie Perkins, but those 3 players between Stevenson, Jones, and Barmore, those are impact guys. Those are critical pieces. Who knows where they are this year without all 3 of those guys? And it had to have been the same way with Richard, especially on that side, on your side of the ball, Ted. You guys must have known you had a game changer when you brought him in.
We did. I love those guys. I mean, I was a big fan of with Big C. He's one of my favorite teammates. And, of course, Matt Light. So, yeah, instantly, that's part of it. It's all part of it. You got to hit on the draft. You got to hit on the young guys. And I would argue that the Patriots' 1st, 2nd, and 4th rounder, Ramondre Stevens the 4th rounder, of course, Barmore the 2nd, and Mac the 1st, that they might, they're probably the best at their position, in my opinion. I think Ramondre is the best all-around back, and I think Barmore is the best interior lineman. And, of course, Mac, we know, is probably the best quarterback on this roster. So that bodes well for this year's team. And so it's a really good blend of guys that are hungry, that have a lot of talent, that haven't won before, that want to win, that haven't had good coaching, maybe probably not like they're getting here in their careers, and they are just taking it all in, and they're having a ball. And you can see the buy-in and how much fun they're having and how much they believe in each other, and then just the fun they're having. That's when you got something special. So it looks to me, Phil, like they have something special brewing here. We'll see how it goes. It's going to be a tough one against the Colts Saturday, but I feel like this kind of has that special feeling like it did in 01.
Yeah. When did you know that you had that in 01? Like, was there a moment? I don't know if these guys know this year. Maybe they'll be able to look back on this season, 2021, and say it was then. Like, I know when it comes to Mac Jones, Kyle Van Noy has said this publicly, and we could see it. We could sense it as it was happening. That week where Cam Newton was gone, with COVID protocols, and Mac Jones was able to step in and take over, I think that's when they really started to believe in Mac Jones, even though they knew he was talented. I don't know about like when they have, if they could really pinpoint the moment when the team kind of coalesced, but can you look back at your group? And it sounds like this is a pretty key similarity between these two teams. So I want to hit a little deeper on this. Like, was there a moment like that for that 01 team?
I point to 2 games. I mean, let's face it, the Jets game when Drew got hurt, clearly Tom comes in. That was a pivotal point. Did you know it
at the time though?
Okay, no. Not when he entered the Jets game. It wasn't like, okay, Tom put his cape on and he went out there at the Jets game, and all of a sudden we knew what we had. But it was like the week after, like the practice week. I mean, here's this kid, and he's screaming, and he's so excited, and he's getting everybody. He's making touchdown throws in practice, and he's like going nuts. And it's like, dude, settle down. This isn't college anymore. But his enthusiasm and he very similar to what Mac Jones has done, Phil. And I said this from the beginning of training camp this year. He needs, if he's going to be the quarterback of this team, he's got to earn the respect. He's got to win his teammates over. And that's not easy for a young quarterback to do, all right? Especially when we had Drew Bledsoe, an established veteran that we all love. All right, so this kid's got to come in here and win us over and make us believe that he's a better option than the incumbent, Drew Bledsoe. That's not easy to do. Mac had to come in here right away and win these guys over and prove that he was better than a former MVP in Cam Newton. And he did it. That's not an easy task. And so I give both Tom Brady and Mac Jones credit for just that. That's not easy to do right away. I will also point to 2 different games in that 01 season, Phil, that I think were pivotal games. Okay, one was around week 7 or week 8. We played the Atlanta Falcons. And I think we found our identity on defense. A lot of people overlooked that Atlanta game. We played in Atlanta, and we blitzed the hell out of them. And I think we sacked the quarterback 9 times. It was Chris Chandelier, as you know. And so we became a very aggressive defense after that. And we really found our groove after that Atlanta game, and we really throttled them. It was Mike Vick came in and started running around, but we had a big lead, and we won that game pretty handily. But the point is, that was a big game as far as giving us some identity on defense. If you look later in the year, a home game against the St. Louis Rams, we lost that game, but it was the quintessential moral victory, Phil, where we lost by a touchdown, but we felt like we went toe-to-toe with the greatest show on turf, and that gave us a ton of confidence. And coincidentally, we didn't lose a game the rest of the year. If you look at this Dallas game this year, the Patriots losing to Dallas at home in overtime, what happened since then? They haven't lost a game since. They learned a lot from that Dallas game. And they probably felt like, that's a really good Dallas team. And even though we lost, we felt like we went toe-to-toe. If we get a chance to play those guys down the road, they'll have an answer. That, to me, is very similar. How the both seasons lined up is both teams got off to a 1-3 start, a little shaky, had some embarrassing losses, had a game in there in which they, lost that they felt like they could have won. And that was turning the tide for that 0-1 team. Is after we lost to St. Louis, we knew, even though we lost, that we could compete with the best. And I feel like that's similar to what happened here with this team. After they lost to Dallas, they felt like, yeah, we lost and it was embarrassing. We gave up a lot of yards, but we'll have an answer for them after that. I feel like there's a comparison there with those two teams because of those games.
I love that. I wanted to know what you thought was this year's Rams game, because we all remember that Rams game. I remember going back to school the next day. I was a sophomore in high school. I remember going back to school the next day and being like, man, this team's good. That team won the Super Bowl last year. Look at all the players they've got on that team. And they could have won that game. And it wasn't like a disheartening kind of loss for the fan base. I think people could sense that there was something happening with this team. And I don't know, like, I would love to get the player perspective now that they're removed from that Cowboys game, Ted, because I remember we talked to Devin McCourty right after that game. And I'm sure, you were on with us, as he was going through his press conference. Man, it sounded like somebody had just kicked his dog. He sounded devastated. Whereas in just watching the Man in the Arena docuseries that Tom Brady's put together now, and watching back that first episode where they're talking about that season, Willie McGinnis has this great line where he's, he and you guys are all watching the Rams kind of walk off the field, and just getting that sense of like, man, these guys are cocky as hell. Like we played them close. Like if we play them again, we're going to kick their ass.
Yeah.
And it was like, almost like as soon as the game was over, it was like, you guys knew you could be better than them. I don't know if the Patriots felt that way right after the Cowboys game, but they got to feel that way now, right? So maybe it just took a little bit more time.
Well, so what they might not have felt that right after the game. My feeling is Bill felt it. And
he might have. Yep.
I think Bill felt it. And maybe those guys didn't realize it at the time. But if the game that came after the Dallas game, the Jets game, let's face it, Phil, if you were to go back and look at that game, I think they won. I don't know, they put up 45. I feel like the number on offense, and it was
50. It was 54, I think, Ted. I think they put a 50 burger that game.
They put up a 50 burger on these guys. There was a gratuitous amount of scoring in that. Okay, there was clearly the Patriots had that game won, but they kept pouring it on, and that was a decision by Bill to pump these guys up, to give them kind of. They needed to have a big win. I don't care if it was a cupcake. We don't look at it. Players don't look at it like, wow, that team's a cupcake. We look at that's an NFL team. I don't care what the quarterback situation is or the injury situation. That's an NFL team. And we went out there and we put them down. And that game right there gave them so much confidence. You could see it. You could read it. You could hear their voices. They were so excited to go out there and have a game like that. And I think Bill did that on purpose. He was going to run up the score because he wanted to pump his guys up. And so that's what he did. And I feel like you saw Bill kind of this whole season nurture this team. I think he did it kind of in 0-1. He wasn't too hard on us. He didn't come down on us for losing. He kept our spirits up. He kept pumping us up. And then when we started winning, he went on a win streak, just like this team is. Now he's like, all right, I got them. They're on my hook. And so now he's starting to act more like Bill, the typical Bill Belichick. Well, it was a good performance, but we got to look at this. And he's being a little bit more critical because he feels like he's got the guys right where he wants them. And so there's a similarity in the two seasons just based on that psychology too.
What do you think about, and I love that point. I think that's a great point, and we are starting to see it for Bill Belichick. I asked him about his team's toughness after they're playing at 50-degree winds, and it's like freezing temperatures on the ground. They run it 3 times, and that's like the ultimate tough win, right? Like old school tough guy, old school football guy kind of win. And I asked him, hey, run the ball, stop the run, cover kicks. That's usually how you're gauging your team's toughness. We know that. What can you say about them after this one? He kind of shrugs his shoulders and says, I mean, that can go up and down over the course of a year.
Yeah,
so, we'll see.
It's right, Phil. In week 3 or 4, it would have been a whole different tune.
Right.
And so that's another thing that makes Bill just on another level, is tuning into his guys, knowing kind of what the mood is, knowing what they need, when to push the buttons, when to throttle back. That a lot of coaches miss that, Phil. They don't get that. And that's a key part of being a head coach, is just being tuned in to, the levers you need to pull and buttons you need to push from a psychological standpoint for your team each year.
I think the buy-in point that you made earlier is a good one too, because at that point he was Bill Belichick coming off of a rough end to his tenure in Cleveland. He's up, he's down. We don't know what he is with the Jets. Then he's here with the Patriots, and you guys have a rough 2000. And so it's like, the buy-in was just different. He wasn't Bill Belichick with, 6 Super Bowl wins as a Patriots head coach the way he is now. But you still do need that buy-in every year. And this team clearly has it now. I wanted to ask you, Ted, do you feel like this team is as balanced or more balanced as the one in 01? Because they did in 01, you guys had some, I think you put up 40 against the Colts and beat them up and Peyton Manning. So it wasn't like it was all 13-10 back in 2001 either, but how does that compare this year to that year?
Yeah, I think I will say this. I think they're more balanced on offense. I really do. If you look at, if you just want to pick apart one, look, Antoine Smith had a really good year for us. But I think the two-headed monster that we have right now with Damian Harris from Ramondre Stevenson, and if you want to even add Brandon Bolden there, they're going to be just as successful and probably more at the end of the day when you look at the total rushing yards. It's probably a little at the end of the day a better rushing attack than maybe the 01 team. And then I would say it's a much better tight end position. Let's face it, as much as I love Wiggy and Rod Rutledge, they didn't even come close to the production that these tight ends have. The offensive lines are very much comparable. And I think the wide receiver, top to bottom, even though you got Troy Brown in there, had over 100 catches in the 01 season, Phil, and he's a great Patriot receiver. I just think top to bottom, you could argue that this year's team is maybe better than the receiving core from the 01 team. So I just think they have more firepower on offense. On defense, that's a different story. I just think our defense was loaded on all 3 levels: defensive line, linebacker. The linebackers, let's face it, hard to argue that there's a better linebacking core than that 01 or that 04 linebacking core that we had. But, they have established players, Van Noy, and the Hightower, clearly. But the secondary is interesting. The secondary is not too dissimilar in a sense that they play a lot of zone. We played a lot of zone. We mixed and disguised our coverages from man-to-man and zone. We were predominantly a zone team. This team has become, after the Dallas game, a predominantly zone team with man-to-man mixed in, and they're disguising, and they're really fooling quarterbacks. So and another thing you got to look at, that 01 team was very good with situational football. 2-minute on offense, third down offense, red zone offense, third down defense, red zone defense, and 2-minute defense. Other than the red zone offense of struggles this year, all right, which I think will get better, there's a similarity as far as just being good from situational football. That's the first time I really learned about situational football, was in that 01 season when Bill broke it down, the game in facets. And it was fascinating to really learn the game in that way. I'd never been taught it that way. And you see situational football is on point this year as it was in 01.
Last thing I want to ask you about the quarterbacks, Ted, because very different situations, right? Tom Brady had a full season as a pro under his belt before he had to start football games. He also was at the disadvantage of having to come in mid-season and pick things up as you guys were in the middle of it. The train was moving, and he had to jump in and fill in for a $100 million quarterback and all the pressures that are involved with that. So they're not as comparable, I don't think, as people think they are.
Definitely not.
It's 2 guys in their first seasons. I also would say this, though. I think it's 2 guys that are, once they got their chance, are extremely confident. Just, again, man in the arena. Brady makes it sound like, like you said, it wasn't like he came out guns blazing in that Jets game. But after a couple weeks, he was able to kind of look at himself and say, okay, I'm ready. And I think Mac Jones probably felt that way in training camp against the Giants. Cam Newton's out. He's getting all of these reps, and he is killing the Giants, Ted. I'm talking to people on that Giants coaching staff, and they're sitting there scratching their head saying, I hope it's not us, but the kid looks really, really good. And, they were sniffing around some quarterbacks in that draft. They've got Daniel Jones, but they were looking at quarterbacks in last year's draft too. And they knew they weren't going to get Mac Jones, but they had studied him, and he was what they were telling me was he was as advertised. And so I think those two facets are comparable. First year, very confident, but which guy do you think is the better player, Brady in 01 or Mac Jones in 21?
Okay, I'm going to always give Tom Brady the benefit of the doubt. I mean, let's face it, he was a 6th-round draft pick. Mac Jones was a 1st-round draft pick. The culture and system is well established here in New England right now, where back then it was an organic kind of thing, right? I mean, we were learning week to week what the system was, what the culture was, and it was being established. So I'm going to give Tom more credit just because of those factors. But when you look at the attitude that you're talking about, the two, very similar in the sense that they had an opportunity. Drew gets hurt. Tom went and took it. Okay. He went and took it. Like a lot of backup quarterbacks, especially young guys, when you have an established incumbent like Drew ahead of you, they are like, just want to keep the seat warm. They just want to keep, not mess the furniture up too much and keep everything kind of the same and ready for the veteran to come back in and not screw it up. Tom was like, no, this is my chance. One man's misfortune is another man's gain. And he saw an opportunity to go in there and take it, and he did. And so did Mac Jones. When you talk about that, those practice sessions against the Giants in training camp, when Cam Newton went on the COVID list, that was his time to go seize it. And a lot of young quarterbacks don't have the gall and the mental fortitude to go realize this is your opportunity to go get what you want right now. It doesn't get any better. You're the guy. We need you. How are you going to react to it? And they both went out and took it. But I will always give the benefit of the doubt to Tom at the end of the day, Phil, because it was, let's face it, that system in 01 with Charlie Weiss as the offense coordinator, it was kind of new to us. I mean, the play action, all the fakes and the kind of, double screens. It was really creative stuff that you hadn't seen in the NFL. It was just kind of new, and they were developing it as the season went on. And so that to me is much more impressive just because of his draft status and the fact that it was still being developed. Where Mac comes in, let's face it, with Josh McDaniels, who's been here forever, the culture's been established, the system's been established. So what Mac's doing is great. I think he's outperformed what we all thought. But I will always give the nod to Tom coming in. Was a much more difficult situation than Mac, but still, nonetheless, Mac's done a great job with what he's been given to.
That's why we bring you in, Ted, because I think we could, and anybody could really, you could go all day over the numbers, right? And look and say, well, Tom Brady did this through 13 games. He had this many touchdowns, this many picks. This was his completion percentage. And let's stack that up and compare it to Mac Jones's. It's a different game as you bring up all of the outside factors, quote unquote, outside factors, meaning just the newness of it all, to be able to embrace everything, learn it on the fly as Brady did. It's this Earhart Perkins system and Charlie's trying to mold it to this team that he has now. Everything is so well established. Bill Belichick is now 6 Super Bowl Bill Belichick. He wasn't back then. For it to come together the way it did in 01 with the quarterback, but really the entire team, that's why that group will always be special, and it'll be hard to ever compare to that group because you'll just never have a scenario like that one ever again.
That's right. And that's the biggest thing, is that we were establishing the culture that has been around for the last 20 years. That 01 team was establishing it for the first time in the history of this dynasty. And so I give guys on that team a lot of credit because we all bought into Bill, and we were very hesitant because the 2000 season was such a disaster that we weren't really sure about this guy. And so guys coming in now, Bill's already got his legacy pretty much intact. Everybody knows that he's the best coach. And so the buy-in factor should be a little bit easier for that reason. So I give those 01 guys so much credit because let's face it, at the end of the day, the talent, I don't think completely matches up. This team has a lot of talent, particularly on offense, as opposed to that 01 team. But we bought in, and we believed in Bill, and we believed in each other, and we loved winning, and we wanted to do something special, and we did it.
So we throw everybody in a time machine and we go back and we play a game, this team versus that team. You were on that team, Ted, so you can't. I don't know. I mean, you tell me who wins that game.
Well, okay. Well, the 0-1 team wins. Come on.
Okay, all right. I assumed you were going to say that. I mean, you can't sit there and say, "Well, yeah, I'd probably get run over by Ramondre Stevenson at the goal line, and we end up losing." Yeah, I didn't anticipate that.
So it's funny because this 2021 team is the way they run the ball is very much like the 0-1 team, and defenses aren't built to stop it. So I would say that 0-1 defense is very much designed to stop this 2021 offense that the Patriots have. You're going to run leads, and you're going to run ace ices, and you're going to run powers, and you're going to run power bobos. Not on that defense in 0-1. No way, no how.
I love it. And I mean, it's another great point. I mean, it's just how they were built for their times, right? And I think the 0-1 offseason and this past offseason, they may end up going down as Bill Belichick's best team building jobs. And what did he do in both scenarios? He's coming off a season where he had to reset the cap. Basically, he's been very open about that in the past where, 2000 cap was a mess and it was just all trying to get things in order so that they could put the team together the way he wanted it. Same deal last year. And then what does he attack? He attacks things that the rest of the league doesn't necessarily value. So you guys are going to be this 3-4 defense, and Mike Vrabel is just wallowing in Pittsburgh and he's barely playing. And, everybody's running 4-3. Bill says, okay, let's play the 3-4. We got the guys that can do it. Ted Johnson can play the Mike in the 3-4. No problem. Like, we've got these guys. Let's bring them in. We don't have to pay him a ton of money because nobody else wants these guys. Right. And let's build our team that way. He did pay some of these guys that he brought in this year a lot of money too, but they are still built as a old school 2-back, 2 tight end team when the rest of the league wants to be 11 personnel, 10 personnel, spread it out, throw it down the field. And he is just, as he did in 0-1, he zigged when everybody zagged team building wise.
I would say this, okay? To me, when it comes to Bill, he's the OG of analytics. Oh, you really points to baseball. No. Bill Belichick was using data, and I can't remember the company's name. It was one of the first analytic companies that would give really good information out, but you had to pay for it. And Bill was always referenced to him. For some reason, I can't remember. But he was always throwing numbers and analytics and, red zone efficiency and third down efficiency. And it was kind of all new to us. But he was the original analytics guy to me in the NFL. And he introduced analytics to the NFL. And he's still doing it now. He's fine-tuned it. And he's looking for, discrepancies. And he's looking for tendencies. And he's looking for weaknesses in all the trends. And he's going to go against those trends because he thinks that's the best way to do it. And you know what? He's pretty smart. Not a bad way to do it, Phil, right?
Economics major, right? From Wesleyan. I mean, it's where's the value? Where are the market inefficiencies? It's Moneyball, but for football. And it's really, I think that's how people refer to it now, but it's just smart team building. It's okay. How can I build my team in such a way that I have something that is of value to us, but it might not be of value to everybody else. That way we can keep our costs down. If we need to spend money, we can spend money, but we can still have a very good team. And he's clearly done that.
And therein lies the rub, because so many coaches, they're committed to their system and they don't change, right? I mean, this is, we do what we do. And that is the kiss of death when you go up against Bill Belichick. Hey, you want to do what you do? All right. We know all the tendencies. We know all the trends, and we can combat that. We can break the code. It's the teams that can adjust and change their variables week to week, year to year, that give other teams the most problems. And that's what Bill does. He never wants to say, well, this is what we do exclusively. No, we do a lot of different things every different week, every year. And so it's hard to pinpoint and really focus in on what you need to attack when you play the Patriots for that reason.
So final stamp of approval. Ted Johnson says it's okay to compare that 0-1 team to that 2021 team, but don't say 2021's better. Right. We can't go there yet. Right.
We're not there yet. Let's see how they do, Phil. Let's see how far they get, and then I'll make a final conclusion on that day.
There we go. We got plenty of football left to watch. Hopefully, you all out there listening will be watching Ted and I every Monday on the breakdown at 6:00 on NBC Sports Boston. We are breaking down the biggest plays of the game from the day before. Ted does a phenomenal job on the whiteboard. That whiteboard is a disaster, but it's a beautiful disaster. It's like a beautiful mind by the time we're finished with that thing. Ted's also throwing me around the set when he's showing us the favorite part. The Ted Neek segment. It's where Ted really can get his hands dirty. And when I say get his hands dirty, he gets his hands like onto my lapels and throws me 5 yards all over our set. It's a beautiful thing. So hopefully you're all watching us there. Ted, thanks so much for being with us here, man. This has been a great discussion. I'm glad we got into it because, again, we've been making this comparison for weeks now. It really feels like for the better part of the last 2 months since the Patriots been on this run. And it's nice to get some detail as to, okay, yeah, that makes sense as a comp. That part of it, maybe not so much. So now we've got a little bit better insight moving forward here. Thanks, buddy.
I appreciate you giving me a chance to talk about the two teams because I talked about it here and there, but not to this kind of depth. And hopefully, the listeners enjoyed that because I think there's a lot of similarities, whether or not begrudgingly the fans of that 0-1 team and guys that played on that 0-1 team want to admit it. There are a lot of similarities. So it was a worthy discussion, I think.
A lot of fun. Thanks again, Ted. Appreciate you, bud.
You bet, bud.
All right. So I have to say, too, if we're able to throw everybody onto Madden, right, and play the 0-1 Patriots versus the 21 Patriots, I'm going to take the 0-1 Patriots as well. But I do think this team has them in certain regards. As Ted mentioned, he likes the running game this year more than he liked that running game in 0-1. But that running game was really what carried their offense in 0-1. I think as a passing offense, they are more explosive. And Ted's taken Brady over Jones. I get it. And I wasn't asking him if Mac Jones, right? You guys are smart enough to understand that. I wasn't asking him if Mac Jones was going to eventually be better than Tom Brady. It was, in 0-1 versus in 21, who would you take? I think I might take Mac Jones. To me, he's already established himself as one of the most accurate passers in the league. And he's the trigger man for an offense that for 2 months now has been the highest rated team in terms of explosive pass play rate. 14% of their passes are explosive gains since they lost to the Bucs in week 4. And that is always, if you're reading me on NBCSportsBoston.com, or you're listening to me on this podcast, or you're watching us on TV, I oftentimes use that week 4 game as the point of demarcation for this year's team. Because through that week 4 game, that loss to Tampa Bay, they were on pace to be one of the worst offensive lines, maybe of all time, when it came to pass protection. That might be a little bit hyperbolic, but not really. I remember writing a story at the time saying they needed to get this thing figured out, or because I had gotten in touch with the league and I got some numbers in terms of quarterback hits and who had recorded or who had absorbed the most quarterback hits. Quarterbacks over the course of the last almost 2 decades. That's how far back their data goes. Mac Jones was on pace to obliterate that record. He was going to be the most frequently hit quarterback in the NFL if he survived the season long enough to break it. That's how often he was being hit through the first 4 weeks of the season. Week 5, they're still dealing with backups, but they got things figured out to a certain degree, and they played better week 5. They were very proud of themselves after the fact. I think a lot of us, myself included, said, okay, congratulations. It's the Houston Texans. You should play better against that defensive front. But they needed something to get themselves going because they know that they had been underperforming. And since then, the offensive line has been much better. Randy Gregory almost took Mac Jones's head off in week 6. I get that. But in terms of the number of overall hits, that thing has come way, way down. So that's why I'm always saying since week 4, okay? Since week 4, this Patriots offense, pass or run, has been one of the best in football. It's why I laughed a little bit when I heard Bobby Okereke, the linebacker for Indianapolis, say this week, hey, we're going to try to make them one-dimensional. We want to see what Mac Jones can do. My reaction to that is, and I know the Patriots' reaction to it too, is, Bobby, what you been watching, man? I mean, how much more evidence do you need? I'm not saying Mac Jones is a already proven to be one of the best, most elite quarterbacks in football, or that they've even won that many big games. They haven't been to the postseason with this guy, with this passing offense. But we've got 2 months of evidence that would say that they are not just one of the best running football teams, that they're actually passing the ball. They rank a lot more highly than they do running the ball in a great many categories. Mac Jones, since week 4, there it is again, is top 3 in football when it comes to completion percentage over expectation, which is a next gen stat. It's an accuracy stat, quarterback rating, yards per attempt. I mean, he is way up the list in all of those things, whether it's advanced metrics, more traditional statistics. They've been one of the best in football. And I'm not sure we could have said the same about Tom Brady in this passing offense here in New England back in 2001. So that's just one area where I would say the Patriots now, and it's a different game now. But again, if you're just looking at league rankings relative to the rest of the NFL, this year's team, at least over the course of these last 2 months, has proven to be really, really effective. And you can't make them one-dimensional. From the evidence that we have right now, you can't. Could you have done that in 2001? Obviously, no one did it well enough, because after they lost to the Rams in that regular season, as Ted was talking about, they didn't lose thereafter. So I just think it's a great discussion to bring it up. And in terms of this podcast, when we're talking about team building, there are so many similarities there that I think are valuable and will always be valuable year after year after year. What do you value? What does the rest of the league value? How does that change potentially what you're willing to spend money on and where you want to save? Can you win zigging when others zag? I think all of those things apply. I think Bill Belichick proved it in 2001. I think he's proving it again right now, maybe in a way this year that he hasn't proven since 2001, because they were so well established, and because Tom Brady was so well established, and because they wanted to build a certain way around one of the best quarterbacks in the league, they could do things a little bit differently this year, similarly to 2001. And I think there are some truths that we can get from that 01 offseason and from this offseason that we can take, make sense of, and carry them forward and say, okay, some of these things should apply. Does it always make sense to spend the most money in free agency? No, of course not. But if you have a certain idea in mind of what you want your team to be, especially when the rest of the league is a certain way, if the rest of the league is light, if the rest of the league is starting to move towards too high coverages, if the rest of the league doesn't want to use a fullback, what can you do? You can form your team in a certain way where you're going to be two backs and two tight ends, and teams aren't used to practicing against that. Teams aren't used to playing against that. Teams aren't used to building the kind of toughness that it takes to succeed against that. And it might help your team. There's no guarantee there, but you give yourselves a chance, especially when you're not sure of what you have at quarterback. Patriots have a lot better idea what they have at quarterback now than what they did in July, and never mind in March when they were signing a lot of these guys initially. They didn't know they were going to get Mac Jones in the draft when they were signing all these players in free agency. They were building their team a certain way. Has it worked out for Mac Jones and his skill set? Of course it has. But they were building it a certain way, whether they had Mac Jones or not. And that's what I find to be so interesting. And that's what I find to be very similar to 2001, and why it's good for us on the Next Pats podcast, where we love talking about this stuff. It's good for us to focus in on. It's not just a guilty pleasure. Talk about 01 versus 21. There are some Next Pats themes in there that I think we can take from Ted and his explanation of how it was to be on that team and how he saw that thing come together. So that was a great conversation for us to have. Always love talking to Ted. Again, watch us on the breakdown every week, 6:00 Monday night. That'll lead you right into early edition typically. So every single night on NBC Sports Boston, you know this already, or hopefully you do. 6:00 every single night. We've got a different football program on there for you. It's Quick Slants on Tuesdays. It's the Game Plan on Wednesdays with myself, Tom Curran, Tom Giles. And then Friday, you've got the weekly spread at 6 with Tom Giles and a host of others. They're going to help you win some money there. So make sure you're tuning into that as well. All right, guys, that's going to do it for this edition of Next Pats. Thanks to Ted Johnson. Thanks to you all for listening. If you want to catch up a little bit more on just how impactful this Patriots passing game has been, because I do feel as though the narrative has shifted so hard since that Bills game to, well, the Patriots really don't want to throw the football. They want to run the football. They do. They definitely do. Won't argue with you there. But when they do throw the football, they've been pretty damn good. So make sure you go check out my latest piece on NBCSportsBoston.com about the Colts, Bobby Okereke, kind of doubting Mac Jones. He's not the first. Kevin Byard of the Titans did the same thing. Mac Jones throws it 30 times against the Titans. He's the highest rated quarterback in football that week. Patriots have proven they can win multiple ways. I think it's good just to kind of point out just how effective they have been through the air. So we're doing that on NBCSportsBoston.com. You'll also find on NBCSportsBoston.com, you Next Packs people will love this, a mock draft. Are you serious? Yeah. Well, last week we had the bye. I said, what better time to get a mock draft going? And the Patriots, you'll be shocked to hear this, they go with a big, strong, mean offensive lineman out of the SEC, Darian Kennard. So he's 6'5". He's 345 pounds. He reportedly has 11-inch hands and 35-inch arms. Both of those will be among the biggest in this year's draft class if those check out at this year's combine. But he's one of the best offensive linemen in football, and specifically one of the best run blocking offensive linemen in football. He won the SEC's award. It's called the Jacobs Blocking Trophy for the best blocker in the SEC. He was just named a first-team All-American by the Associated Press. This guy's a really, really good football player. He's accepted an invitation to the Senior Bowl, so we'll get a closer look at him down in Mobile, Alabama. We'll hopefully talk to Jim Nagy at some point, executive director of the Senior Bowl, about Kennard and others. We know how highly the Patriots value that Senior Bowl, but make sure you go check out our mock, NBCSportsBoston.com, to get more on Kennard. He just feels like a Patriot. And I've got some videos on there. You watch him play. He is violent. He is angry. And as a Patriots fan, you're going to have to love that. He's one of these guys that Bill Belichick talks about, offensive line, defensive line, doesn't grow on trees, that kind of size. He's not Trent Brown size, but he is next level big. And if Trent Brown ends up departing New England via free agency, his contract's up after this year. If at some point down the line, Isaiah Wynn ends up moving on, his fifth-year option is picked up, so they have him for 2022. But if they don't want to re-sign him down the road, maybe Kennard is somebody who can play tackle either side. He has played either side at Kentucky. It looks like he's probably more of a right tackle. That's where Kentucky has had him for the majority of the last 2 years. But who knows? It's still so early in the process. Is this guy a surefire first rounder? I don't know. I can't tell. I don't think anybody knows. It's too hard, especially when the Patriots are picking 31st in mock drafts, which they are for the most part. And you're seeing this because they're the number one seed in the AFC right now. So that's where we're at. They're not picking in the top half of the first round as they were last year. So it's a little hard to gauge who will be available, who won't. But I think you guys are going to like Darian Kennard. Stick him next to Mike Onwenu. Now you've got about 700 pounds of offensive linemen there, maybe on the right side moving forward. It's kind of exciting. It is. Admit it. Okay. Maybe it's just me. Anyway, check that out online. Hopefully we could talk to Darian at some point moving forward, because he'd be a great guy to chat with here on Next Pats. So we will effort that interview. We appreciate you online, on the pod, on television. Have a great weekend. Enjoy Patriots Colts, and we'll talk to you next week.